Thank you all so much for coming out. Particularly, let me thank the leadership of the state, demonstrable example of the feelings represented, not only here in Sacramento, but represented by hundreds of millions of Americans that are exhausted with the violence, exhausted with the hate, exhausted with the platitudes, the inadequacy in terms of the response to address our fundamental fate that is tied together. And I say that as governor of the most diverse state in the world's most diverse democracy. I say that from a position of real pride. We live in a state where 27% of us are foreign born. We're a state of refuge, a universal state at our best. I've said this on ad nauseum occasions. At our best, we don't tolerate that diversity. At our best, we celebrate that diversity. Pluralism. We practice pluralism. We are a pluralistic society, and we recognize that we are all better off when we're all better off. That said, we're not immune from the kind of violence, the kind of hate that we see in headlines not only across this country, as was exampled, but around the rest of the world, not least of which New Zealand, Quebec, and other parts of the globe. Anti-Semitism is on the rise around the globe, in Europe in particular, and here in the United States of America. ADL is coming out with new statistics, coincidentally tomorrow. I'll save the announcement for them, but take all the stats you have. They need to be updated in 24 hours. They're exponentially worse than you've been led to believe. The official stats are much worse than you've been led to believe. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. To be fair, it was on the rise before Trump took the oath of office, but they have accelerated. Hate has been weaponized. The racial purity that is being advanced, that has been rhetorical, it's been found in words, now is being advanced in action in ways that have connected a trend line that self-evidently is today's and yesterday's headline. And so the question for all of us is, what are we going to do about it? We're not victims of fate. We can manifest a brighter future. That's California. That's the fate we all hold in common, and that is a sense of purpose, agency, to set a different tone and tenor, and to advance a brighter future. And it's in that spirit that I want to pick up on Jesse's comments. I want to make this easy on you. I won't worry about the legislation because we can simply pass an appropriation. And I am in the process of 3 days of meetings to prepare for the May revise. In the May revise will be that $15 million appropriation to secure those grants. And let me thank all of you for that. Let me thank you for your leadership. You mentioned, and Ben and others, we all were there at the mansion, 3 weeks ago, talking about this specific request. Never could we have imagined doing it a day or two after an incident in our own state. But it was self-evident the need to do more. Just $500,000 last year. $8 million was requested in appropriation. Only $500,000 could be met. $4.5 million in the last 3 years. But as was noted, that money pales in comparison to the need for mosques, for synagogues, for other institutions. This state will do what the federal government is not doing, and I want to highlight that because it deserves to be highlighted. The Trump administration cut their domestic budget to address the issue of domestic terrorism by close to 80%, 80%. That's a demonstrable expression of the proposition of how they value and prioritize this issue. If they won't do that work, we will step in to that position of leadership. That's what we do. That's who we are. That's what California represents. We need to do, though, more than just provide grants for cameras, for locks, to harden facilities, to provide personnel. But we also need to do more in addition to education. We need better data collection. And one of the issues that was highlighted the Department of Justice was the inadequacy of some of our data collection, particularly as it relates to hate crimes. We appropriated in the January budget, and hopefully with your support, we'll see that approved, close to $1 million to improve some of our efforts in that space. We also have included in the budget some $20 million of additional money for our police officers' standards and training post. While a lot of that money was intended to use for implicit and overt bias and de-escalation, incredibly important issues, that money also can be used to train law enforcement, particularly local law enforcement, as it relates to issues that came to a fore. You saw, by the way, I thought the extraordinary leadership displayed by Sheriff Gore in the San Diego region. Sheriff Gore was actually trained by the ADL and others. He was a living example of the kind of training and how that will manifest in a sensitivity and a capacity of understanding, a depth of understanding, ability to communicate from the law enforcement prison as the sheriff did. I think that's an example we can spread throughout the state of California as well. Look, we have task forces already. We've been working with OES on some task forces that need to be updated and need to be, I think, recalibrated. And you will hear more tomorrow about what the Office of Emergency Services will be doing on recalibrating our violence extremism task force, which, by the way, needed to change its name anyway. Frankly, it comes out of some of the old 9/11 paradigm, but it has not necessarily been as inviting as a task force as it could be. There's been some real issues about the use of our language and our approach, and I think this has opened the door, certainly over the weekend, it opened the door for a different dialogue with our team at OES, and we will be enhancing and advancing that task force as well to highlight and focus on the issues of hate crime in a much more deliberative and, yes, transparent way, protecting civil liberties and protecting against those concerns about people feeling that they are being disproportionately called out, making sure that we balance those concerns in a more enlightened way. That's what we're going to do in the short run. But I will say this, as a state that, because of the leadership behind me, has led the nation in anti-hate crime legislation, program passing is not problem solving. You got to change culture. You can't just change laws. It's not just about money, it's about a mindset. And that's why I think Ben's point about education, perhaps foundationally, is the most important point we can make. My 7-year-old son came in on my mother and father's grave last week asking me if we were Jewish. And I said, why? He says, well, a friend of mine said he can't stand Jewish people. I said, he's a friend of yours? He said, yeah. And he's been very negative. And because he has a lot of uncles and aunts that are Jewish, he asked if he was Jewish. I said, no, many members of our family are Jewish. And he goes, he just won't stop talking about being anti-Jewish. He's a 7-year-old boy in our backyard. And, you can't, I mean, we all live with this. You can't make this stuff up. What the hell's wrong with us? We're so much better than this. And that's a kid. That's the next generation. If we don't attach ourselves with some sense of urgency to those conversations and get into those conversations in a more enlightened way, then we're just going to be playing whack-a-mole. We're going to just be responding to crisis after crisis. We have to deal with the underlying issues as well. And so I appreciate the early conversations we've had with Tony Thurman. He can talk more about some of the ideas that he looks to advance. There is a lot of interesting curriculum in the space, but it is not spread. It is not scaled as it should. And I want folks to know those conversations are also happening with the sense of urgency in addition to everything else you've heard. Final words. I just want to thank again. I love this legislature. I love the Assembly and Senate leadership. because they get it. These weren't phone calls we had to make. This was who got the call first. That's the kind of state we have. And it's a point of pride. I'm new. I'm a new governor. But I am incredibly proud of this state and its leadership. And we are united as a state, condemning hate, condemning anti-Semitism, condemning bigotry. And we are more than capable of leading a conversation anew, not only for the state of California and our 40 million residents, but to light up a different conversation across this country. And so it's in that hope and expectation that we never have to be back at a press conference like this. And again, I congratulate all of you for a job well done and the job we have ahead of us in the next legislative session. With that, the Lieutenant Governor of California.